Jordan Peterson has been a real firebrand in pop culture. His recent hits include suggesting that Russia's invasion of Ukraine is the result of American gender politics, fat-shaming Sports Illustrated's cover model Yumi Nu, and getting banned from Twitter for saying Elliot Page's transition was a crime committed by his doctor. In today's video, we're gonna take a look at this super controversial man and how he became so famous and infamous. We'll start, naturally, in the beginning with how he earned the credentials to say the things he does. Peterson is a Canadian man who was born in 1962 in Edmonton, Alberta. His mom was a librarian at the Grande Prairie Regional College, and his dad was a teacher, so it's only natural that he gravitated towards academia himself. But before he did that, in his teenage years, he worked as a student volunteer for the New Democratic Party, where he engaged in left-wing activism until he met some other left-wing activists. He initially enrolled at his mom's workplace before transferring to the University of Alberta, where he picked up a BA in political science. After taking some time to study Cold War psychology and the philosophies of Jung, Nietzsche, and Dostoevsky, he solidified his commitment to these new interests by getting a BA in psychology. Finally, he earned the right to add doctor to his name by getting a PhD in clinical psychology at McGill University. Peterson's research career began at Harvard University, where he was teaching and conducting research into the psychology of substance abuse and aggression. He later shifted gears to researching personalities, and you'll find plenty of publications with his name on them. According to Shelley Carson, a PhD alumnus from Harvard, this is the origin of Peterson's cult of personality. Some of his students loved the professor so much that they'd cry on their last day of classes with him. But that, you see, was just the beginning. Before he was an internet celebrity, Peterson was an academic celebrity. Well, Peterson had acquired many critics in the years since he became internet famous. He's actually well respected in his field of research. He famously published a paper that concluded that people who pay more attention to irrelevant details tend to be more creative. He's been cited over 10,000 times by other authors in research papers, which puts him in the top 70 of the most cited researchers in his field. Of course, academic citations don't get you an international mainstream following, but for those who maybe dismiss the things he says simply because he's Jordan Peterson, his knowledge and experience have been pretty thoroughly peer-reviewed. David Watson, a psychology professor at Notre Dame, described his work as solid and well-respected. Peterson hasn't had much time to focus on publishing research papers lately. Of his 20 most cited papers, only one of them was published post-2010. This is naturally because he's shifted gears to publishing best-selling books. The biggest inflection point in his rise to fame came in 2016, for it was in 2016 that Peterson got back into politics. In the fall of 2016, the Canadian Parliament was debating Bill C-16. This was a bill that addressed transgender rights by banning discrimination against people on the basis of gender identity or gender expression. Now, since we mentioned the T word, you probably understand that this bill was extremely controversial, and it was the subject of some heated debate in Canada at the time. The bill also inspired Peterson to re-enter the political arena years after his work as a left-wing activist. But it turns out that Peterson wasn't feeling very left on this bill after all. In a series of YouTube rants, he argued that this bill went against free speech and swore to never refer to his trans students by their preferred pronouns. In his view, separating gender and biological sex was radically politically correct thinking, and he was prepared to pay any fine and go to jail for his beliefs. Peterson's political understanding didn't quite match up to his psychological understanding, seeing as he misunderstood what hate speech actually meant in the context of C-16. But people rallied around his belief that acknowledging someone's gender was a dangerous thing to do. A culture war started to brew around Peterson, and it culminated in his encounter with a group of student activists at the University of Toronto, where he was working at the time. His key argument against the activists was that they were playing a dangerous game. Their activism was a symptom of a general trend towards political correctness, and that trend would produce an ugly backlash. He cited his decades of research into the rise of Nazism, saying that a radical push towards the political left would spark an equal but opposite push from the political right. Was he right about that? Considering some things that happened in 2016 and other things that have happened since, he may well have read the tea leaves perfectly. And that's how Peterson's mix of politics and psychology became his brand. That controversial encounter with the students made Peterson a superstar, and all the media outlets wanted a chance to debate him. He made his rounds on TV and YouTube shows, willing to debate any many left-wing hosts who thought they could hang with JP. And he was a formidable debater. His experience in the academic world, as well as his scientific acumen, allow him to argue from a more enlightened position than many of his opponents. The fact that Peterson's been willing to give scientific backing to some less than popular political opinions has earned him quite the fan base. As of 2018, he's been earning around $80,000 a month from his Patreon. No wonder he hasn't published much since 2016. He doesn't need to. He bragged about this fact on an appearance on Joe Rogan's podcast, saying that he'd found a way to monetize social justice warriors. The careful cultivation of his brand has allowed him to maintain his star power over the years. Beyond Order, his 2021 book, has been a mainstay on bestseller charts. And as we mentioned at the start of this video, his inflammatory comments have their audience, even as they get him banned on various platforms. But how far is too far? At the outset, Peterson's opinions were much more center-right than fully right-wing. He argued against socialist policies and believed that it's the nature of capitalism that some people end up more successful than others. His most famous bugbear is obviously identity politics. That was what made him famous, and he still believes that it's one of the biggest scourges of society today. But it does look like the longer Peterson remains in the spotlight, the further right he slips. You can only garner so much support from the politically moderate, and if we've seen anything in the past decade, it's that the netizens that are further to the right are a group that needs a figurehead. When he fat-shamed Yumi Nu, his argument wasn't accompanied by any kind of academic reasoning, nor was his claim that American gender politics somehow led to Russia invading Ukraine. At least the Elliot Page thing was consistent with the views he'd expressed before, but those remarks got him the internet notoriety he was fishing for. His new fan base was more than happy to hear him acknowledge some of these views. Let's close this profile by asking one last question. Can Peterson stay as popular as he is? It's hard to measure that sort of thing, but one way we can look at it is to track Peterson's sales, so to speak. That's how his daughter Michaela Peterson set out to prove Jordan's popularity in the wake of being banned from Twitter. She points to his podcast, which is hosted on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. On the former platform, the podcast jumped from number 45 to number 25 in the rankings, taking the number 1 spot in the educational category. Meanwhile, on Spotify, it's holding on to its highest ranking ever at 44 overall. He's still getting views on his Instagram and YouTube, and he hasn't really faced a cancellation per se. Is that the best way to judge Jordan Peterson's popularity? He's an intellectual. There should be more to him than just his viewer and listener counts, but maybe those are the metrics that matter most when it comes to Peterson. 6 years ago, Peterson acquired a certain fan base by lending academic backing to transphobia. Yet there doesn't seem to be anything intellectual about Jordan Peterson anymore. It seems that he's just any other social media personality, except when he says things they're supposedly validated by his PhD. In many ways, Jordan Peterson is to the academia what Elon Musk is to tech. Musk, too, became popular among a certain group of people because he had a bold vision for humanity's future and he had a way to get there. While Tesla and SpaceX continue to do groundbreaking work, Musk is busier appealing to a certain mass of Twitter followers. And just like Musk isn't losing much steam with his fans, it doesn't seem like Peterson is either. We'll end our profile of Jordan Peterson here. What do you think of Peterson and his ideologies? Do you agree with his message and the way he puts it out? Or are you one of his many skeptics? Publish your peer-reviewed answers in the comments section below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.